You said that the world's first trillionaire would be somebody in climate change in the past.
Yeah.
Let's update that. What's today, as we stand here today, what sector will the world's first trillionaire come from?
Yeah, I think it's energy transition.
So energy. So the things
Yeah.
we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Really?
And
So isn't it okay?
well, I think the way that I think about
So this is a single individual. Sorry to interrupt. You see their ability to actually build a company that makes huge amount of money as opposed to this distributed idea that you've been talking about.
yeah, I'll give you my philosophy on wealth.
Mhm.
Most of it is not you. An enormous amount of it is the genetic distribution of being born in the right place and blah, 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 irrespective of the boundary conditions of how you were born or where you were raised, right? So, at the end of the day, you and I ended up in the United States. It's a huge benefit to us. Second is the benefit of our age. It's much better and much more likely to be successful as a 46-year-old in 2023 than a 26-year-old in 2023, because in my case, I have demographics working for me. For the 26-year-old, he or she has demographics working slightly against them.
Can you explain that a little bit? What are the demographics here?
In the case of me, the distribution of population in America looks like a pyramid. And in that pyramid, I'm wedged in between these two massive population cohorts, the boomers and then these, Gen Z and millennials. And that's a very advantageous position. It's not dissimilar to the position that Buffett was, where he was, packaged in between boomers beneath him and the silent generation above him. And being in between two massive population cohorts turns out to be extremely advantageous, because when the cohort above you transitions power and capital and all of this stuff, you're the next person that likely gets handed it. So we have a disproportionate likelihood to be, we are lucky to be older than younger. So that's an advantage. And then the other advantage that has nothing to do with me is that I stumbled into technology. I got a degree in electrical engineering, and I ended up coming to Silicon Valley. And it turned out that in that moment, it was such a transformational wind of change that was at my back, right? So the wealth that one creates is a huge part of those variables. And then the last variable is your direct contributions in that moment. And the reason why that can create extreme wealth is because when those things come together at the right moment, it's like a chemical reaction. I mean, it's just crazy. So that was sort of part number one of what I wanted to say. The second thing is, when you look then inside of these systems where you have all these tailwinds, right? So in tech, I think I benefit from these three big tailwinds. If you build a company or are part of a company or a part of a movement, your economic participation tends to be a direct byproduct of the actual value that thing creates in the world. Mm-hmm. And the thing that creates in the world will be bigger if it is not just an economic system, but it's like a philosophical system. It changes the way that governance happens. It changes the way that people think about all kinds of other things about their lives. So there's a reason, I think, why database companies are worth X, social companies are worth Y, but the military industrial complex is worth, as much. And I think there's a reason why that if you, for example, were to go off and build some newfangled source of energy that's clean and hyperabundant and safe, that what you're really going to displace or reshape is trillions and trillions of dollars of worldwide GDP. So the global GDP is, I call it 85 trillion, right? It's going at 2 to 3% a year. So in the next 10 years, we'll be dealing with $100 trillion of GDP, right? Somebody who develops clean energy in 2035 will probably shift 10% of that around, $10 trillion. A company can easily capture 30% of a market, $3 trillion. A human being can typically own a third of one of these companies, $1 trillion. So you can kind of get to this answer where it's like, it's going to happen in our lifetime, But you have to, I think, find these systems that are so gargantuan and they exist today. It's more bounded because price discovery takes longer. In an existing thing, it's more unbounded because you know what it is. You know the tentacles that energy reaches, right? Of that $80 trillion of worldwide GDP, I bet you if you added up all the energy companies, but then you added up all of manufacturing, if you added up all of transport, you'd probably get to like 60 of the 80.
Do you have an idea of which energy, which alternate energy, sustainable energy is the most promising?
Well, I think that we have to do a better job of exploring what I call the suburbs of the periodic table. So, we're really good in Seattle, the upper Northwest.
Yes.
We're kind of good in Portland, but we're non-existent in San Diego, and we have zero plan for North Carolina through Florida.
Yeah.
And so
is that a fancy way of saying nuclear should be part of the discussion?
I think nuclear, room temperature semiconductors. I'm not convinced right now that the existing set of nuclear solutions will do a good job of scaling beyond bench scale. I think there is a lot of complicated technical problems that make it work at a bench scale level, even partially, but the energy equation is going to be very difficult to overcome in the absence of some leaps in material science.
Have you seen any leaps? Is there promising stuff like you're seeing the cutting edge from a company perspective?
Yeah, I would say not yet. But the precursor, yes. I have been spending a fair amount of time. So talking about like a new framework that's in my mind is around these room temp superconductors. And so I've been kind of bumbling around in that forest for about a year. I haven't really put together any meaningful perspectives, but again, talking about like trafficking in companies and investments that are very lonely, but they allow me to generate returns that are relatively unique and independent. That's an area where I don't see anybody else when I'm there. I'll give you another area. We, I think, are about to unleash in a world of zero energy and zero compute costs. Computational biology will replace wet chemistry. And when you do that, you will be able to iterate on tools that will be able to solve a lot of human disease. I think like if you look at the head of like the top 400 most recurring rare diseases, I think like half the number, 200, is a specific point mutation as just a mismethylation between C and T. That's like, whoa, wait, you're telling me in billions of lines of code, I forgot a semicolon right there. Mm-hmm. That's causing this whole thing to miscompile. So I just got to go in there and boop, and it's all done. That's a crazy idea. That was a C++, C throwback for people that don't know what I said.
There's two people who are clapping.
Two people there. Everybody else like, what? This is not a Python. What are you talking about?
Makes perfect sense.
So
that couldn't that be a source of the computational biology unlocks? Obviously medicine is begging for
the thing with energy like though is that the groundwork is well laid. And talking about sort of like the upper bound is well defined. The upper bound in medicine is not well defined because it is not the sum total of the market cap of the pharma industries. It is actually the sum total of the value of human life. And that's an extremely ethical and moral question.
Isn't there special interests that are resisting making progress on the energy side? So how, governments, and how do you break through that? You have to acknowledge the reality of that, right?
I think it's less governments. In fact, like I said, I think President Biden has done a really incredible job. Well, Chuck Schumer really has done a really incredible job because, so just to give you the math on this, right? Like back to this, so 3% of everything of a market are zealots. But when you get past 5%, things tend to just go nuclear to 50, 60%. The way that they wrote this last bill, the cost, I'll just use the cars as an example. The cost of an average car is $22,500. Mm-hmm. The cost of the cheapest battery car is $30,000. And lo and behold, there's a $7,500 credit. And it's like, to think the invisible hand didn't know that math was right, I think is kind of a little bit malarkey. And so the battery EV car is going to be the same price as the thing, and it's going to go to 40, 50%. So we're already at this tipping point, so we're kind of ready to go. In these other markets, it's a little bit more complicated because there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to get built. So, the gene editing thing as an example, we have to build a tool chain that looks more like code that you can write to.
Facebook is written in, I think, PHP originally.
PHP, yeah.
Which is, I'm still a big fan of. Sometimes you have to use the ugly solution and make it look good versus trying to come up with a good solution, which will be too late.